Before they left Riga, Alec arranged for Polina to take a 3-day immersive course given by an old classmate of his from the English school. The class was conducted in secrecy in the man's apartment. There were 6 students, none of whom spoke any English. But for those 3 days, they were forbidden to speak any other language. The only Russian they heard came from Soviet instructional recordings. Of those 3 days, Polina retained little more than 2 phrases. One was, "Did you go on the motoring tour of England?" The other was, "Why not visit the exhibition of national economy achievements of the USSR?" In Rome, she enrolled in a language class offered by a Jewish vocational agency. A young American girl taught the class, and she spent the first lesson demonstrating the differences between British and American English. At the end of the class, everyone came away feeling like they knew even less than when they went in. To help her with her studies, Alec and Lyova took to speaking English in the mornings before Alec left for work. Lyova had learned some English in Israel because his civil engineering firm had had a German client. In Rome, he read the Herald Tribune and the Times of London. "Good morning, Al. Good morning, Leo. Good morning, Paula. Would you like a cup of coffee? Yes, thank you. It is a nice day. The sun is shining. Please, open the window. There are many people in the street. There are men, women, and children. There is a cat. Rome has many cats. Rome has many beautiful women, but they are not more beautiful than Paula." Polina had always been a good student, but she found herself struggling with the language. Alec encouraged her, saying that even his mother's cousin in Chicago, barely 5 feet tall, was learning the language. Everyone learned it. Millions of imbeciles spoke it every day. Lyova said that in his experience, the most important thing in learning a language was confidence. Intelligent people who doubted themselves often had it the hardest. "How were you in school?" Lyova asked. "In what sense?" "Did you worry very much?" "Only at the very end. The exams, that's nothing. Everybody worries about those." "I might have worried more." "Why?" "I didn't want to be separated from my boyfriend." "And what happened?" "I scored well. We weren't separated. Instead, we got married. Later divorced." "Yes, it might have been better if we'd been separated, but I didn't think that at the time." The truth was that at the time, she'd wanted desperately to fail and to be sent away to some far-flung region where Maxim would never be expected to visit. But she was disgusted with that part of... Oh, sorry, I can't see it from here. Okay. But she was disgusted with that part of her and wanted to renounce it, smother it, seal it inside a vault of constancy. And so she'd worried about scoring well to secure a placement in Riga. As she waited for her grades, she resolved that if they were insufficient, she wouldn't simply abide by the decision, but she would do whatever she could to steer her life onto its proper course. She went to her father, something she'd never done before. He had just then returned from Gdansk. Oh, can I make an aside? Gdansk is actually the only city in Poland I have ever been to. So I was very excited when I read this because I actually had a visual and it made me feel very worldly. Okay. She waited until her mother and sister were away from the apartment and then told him, careful to keep any hint of plaintiveness out of her voice, that there was something she needed to discuss. Her father sat at the kitchen table in the wash of afternoon sunlight. He had covered the table with newspaper and spread out upon it the disassembled parts of a hairdryer that had recently stopped working. He'd brought the hairdryer back from East Germany several years earlier as a present for Polina's mother, and it had become one of the family's most prized possessions. They didn't know anyone else who had one. Polina's mother used it sparingly for herself and for the girls, and occasionally she loaned it to some of their neighbors. Every now and then, Polina would answer the door and discover a woman with her head wrapped in a towel, Another family might have turned this into a small venture and charged for it, but in their home, even to intimate such a thing was an abomination. Sometimes a neighbor brought a jar of preserves or a tin of sprote, rats. Never knew that word was, I had to look it up. I just know it as sprote. Tiny little fish, super tiny, in a tin, in oil, super awesome. I could eat an entire thing myself, then feel really disgusted because it's just oil and tiny fish, but it's really good. Okay. Sometimes the neighbor brought a jar of preserves or a tin of sprout, but only out of the goodness of her heart. When the dryer broke down, another neighbor, an electrician, would conjure the necessary resistor or fuse for which Polina's father paid the designated market price, not a kopeka less, always in front of witnesses and always with a signed receipt. Her father would then go about fixing the dryer himself. Tinkering with devices and gadgets was the closest thing he had to a hobby. Like others of his generation, he possessed a deep reverence for mechanical things. With Polina's graduation approaching, her mother had hoped he might get the dryer back into working order so that she could set her and the girl's hair for the ceremony. The hair dryer and the graduation ceremony provided Polina with a convenient way to broach the topic. She tried to frame her words as directly as possible. At first it seemed to her as if her father didn't quite hear her, as if he was too immersed in the coils and circuits of the hairdryer, but eventually, as she persevered, he turned his attention to her. "You have always been an excellent student. You will do fine," he said. "I don't think so." "Nothing comes of this sort of talk." "I don't want to be separated from Maxim," Polina said, conviction trailing a half step behind her words. "Nobody's forcing you to separate. If we're sent to different places, we won't be able to get married." "This is a pointless conversation," her father said evenly. "I'm surprised at you." His attention drifted back down to his repair work. He had issued what amounted to his harshest rebuke, the suggestion that Polina was behaving in a way unbefitting her father's daughter. "I just thought if something could be done," Polina said. "I've heard enough." Polina knew not to raise the subject again. In the succeeding days, her father acted as if the conversation had never happened. When he was home, he kept tinkering with the hairdryer until one morning, Polina awoke to the sound of its shrill whine. Later that same day, as her father was heading out the door, he called Polina over and somberly told her that there would be a position for her at the VEF radio factory. Before Polina could collect herself to thank him, he was already down the hall. In the end, both her panic and her father's intervention proved unwarranted. When the grades were announced, Polina discovered that she had finished in the top quartile. Her results guaranteed her a position in Riga. Now, if the VEF hired her, nobody could challenge the impartiality of their decision. The outcome suited everyone. With her grades, she had vindicated herself before her father. Meanwhile, without suffering any adverse effects, her father had been able to demonstrate his love for her. On the day of her graduation ceremony, she sat with her parents and Nadia under the glass roof of the university's great hall. According to custom, her father held a bouquet of flowers, white, fragrant calla lilies. Polina's hair, freshly shampooed and styled by her mother, shone brilliantly, as if radiating intellectual light. She wore a new dress of luminous green cloth, the material purchased by her mother and then soon sewn by a seamstress after a French pattern. Polina was the first in their family to receive a university degree. Anything her father had learned after 8 grades of primary school came courtesy of the Soviet Navy. Her mother had come from a small Belarusian town where the pursuit of higher education was rare for anyone, and particularly for women. When Polina heard her name called, she rose from her chair and felt herself propelled to the stage, as if by the cumulative force of her parents' dreams. In the evening, Polina joined her classmates for a party at Café Riga in the Old City. All over town, graduates were dancing and toasting their student days goodbye. A number of her classmates brought their instruments and played the songs of the Beatles, Raymond Pauls, and Domenico Modugno. Glasses of champagne were circulated, and they all dropped the diamond-shaped lapel pins they'd been awarded into them, then downed the contents in one swallow, leaving the shiny blue enamel glinting between their teeth. At around 10 o'clock, Maxim left his class party and joined Polina at Café Riga. When she spotted him in the crowd, she was surprised by how glad she was to see him. A warm, proprietary feeling bloomed inside her. This man, blinking through the haze of cigarette smoke, intently searching the room for her, rubbing absently at the scar above his eyebrow, whereas a boy schoolmate had hit him with a badminton racket. This was her man. Out of the many, he was hers, and this simple recognition was enough to endear him to her. Flushed with optimism, alcohol, and affection, Polina fell into his arms and swept him onto the dance floor. Her classmates offered them a steady flow of champagne, vodka, and wine. Before long, Maxim forgot his usual reserve, loosened his tie, and danced with uninhibited, clumsy exuberance as the band played the Beatles' Get Back. At dawn, as they weaved together along the cobblestones and the old city, Maxim proposed and Polina accepted. Their future seemed as assured as a future could be. Like Polina, Maxim had scored well on his exams and had his choice of prestigious factories. She would take the job at VEF, while he would take a position at the highly regarded Popov Radiotechnica. They would marry, move in with his parents, file a request with the Municipal Housing Authority for a separate apartment, and start a family. They would embark upon productive and satisfying adult lives. Upon productive and satisfying adult lives.